Hey there, it's the Online Bible Reading Club. This is the Fully Live Athlete Pastor channel, and we're on day 124. And what we're looking at today is one of the most extraordinary stories I have ever heard. As you look at 1 Kings 16 through 18, and then we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 22, 47 through 71, you're looking at really the story of Elijah principally in 1 Kings 16 through 18. Now it sets up the context for what Elijah is going to do, which is incredible, is that the nation of Israel, which is the northern 10 tribes, they have been cut off from the kingship of David, which is the blessed king. And so what happened is Solomon sinned greatly by worshiping other gods rather than Yahweh, the Lord, the Creator, because he married all these foreign women. And because of the sin, God has ripped away a great portion of the kingdom from him. And you've got these horrible kings that took on this stripped away land of Israel from the king in Jerusalem. And you see in the 16th chapter of Kings this downward spiral of each king got worse than the other and worshipped false gods and had these golden calves they worshipped. And it was leading Israel into great sin. Well, it culminates in a king named Ahab. And Ahab really repeats the sin of Solomon by marrying a foreign woman named Jezebel. And Jezebel introduces Baal worship into the nation of Israel. And this is going to be the context for the Elijah story, which I said in the beginning is one of the most amazing stories you'll ever hear. Because when you look at a full nation who is completely wrapped up in worshiping not their God, but another God. They've committed spiritual adultery with another than their own God. And why would they do such a thing? Well, what this Baal promises is weather that they need for their crops, for their livelihood, for their food. And you know, he's the god of the storm, Baal is. If you look at resources about the background of what this God is supposed to be. His symbols were thunder and lightning, and he was also supposed to bring fertility. So if you worship this Baal, and they've committed themselves to this, and Ahab is so wrapped up in committing himself to this that he even rebuilds Jericho at cost of his own sons. There's a prophecy from Joshua, the sixth book of the Bible, where if you rebuild Jericho, you'll be cursed, and his sons die, his oldest and youngest, due to this as a curse. Well, he is so bad, Ahab is, and he's wed to this Jezebel. They introduce Baal worship because they're like, well, our prosperity demands this. We can't rely on Yahweh alone. We can't just trust him. So we're going to take matters into our own hands, and we're going to introduce Baal worship into the land. Well, this makes Yahweh very angry because his people are to trust him alone. Do you trust him alone? Do I trust him alone? None of us perfectly do. We all sin, but to wrap yourself up in reliance upon a false god is the worst sin. It's idolatry. It's the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. And so what Elijah is called to do, first, he tells King Ahab, there will be no rain for 3 years. And this is a direct slap in the face to Baal, because Baal, that's his mojo. That's what he brings. He's supposedly the God who brings the rain and the prosperity, but no prosperity for you. 3 years of utter devastation, no rain. Well, it all culminates in a battle at Mount Carmel. If you look at the 18th chapter, where there's been a lot of interesting things you could see here, how Elijah prefigures Christ. He does things like raising people from the dead and providing miraculous food for those who are starving during the time of no rain. And he looks like Jesus does in the Gospels. And so when you see the disciples of Jesus who are asked by him, who do people say I am? Well, some people say Elijah because they know the stories of Elijah. But here's one that is truly, as I said, remarkable, and one of the greatest stories you'll ever hear, is you've got one prophet who still believes in, and there are others, a couple others that recognize Elijah as a God-fearing, true prophet. But Elijah stands alone versus the whole nation of Israel. He says to Ahab, he says to the king, summon the whole nation. And they have a face-off at Mount Carmel. And so he says, bring the prophets of Baal. Bring Jezebel's Baal prophets here. And 450 Baal prophets line up against one prophet from Yahweh. And remember, the prophet of Yahweh has been able to stop the rain for 3 years. Well, what happens here? He says, okay, we're going to set up 2 altars with 2 animals, and we're going to see which god, Baal or Yahweh, is able to rain down fire and consume the sacrifice. Well, they flip a coin to see who goes first, as they do in contest, and Baal draws the first opportunity. So they line up, and they could quickly end this thing by praying and asking Baal to rain down fire on this sacrifice. Well, what happens? Baal is asleep, or maybe he's relieving himself, as Elijah says. Elijah is a master trash talker, not only a great prophet, but a trash talker, and he humiliates the prophets of Baal, all 450 of them, who are unable to do this. Now they start chanting, they start cutting themselves and bleeding out so that they can show Baal they're serious and they need his help. Well, what's he doing? He's asleep, or he's relieving himself. He has no power. And this is what we trust in these inanimate objects and these gods of our culture and our world. They're ultimately going to be silent and unable to help us because they're not true. They're created by us. They're figments of our imagination. That they could actually satisfy us and deliver us is nonsense. And Elijah exposes that. And what happens when Elijah's turn comes up? He prays, he sets up the sacrifice, and not only does he do that, he soaks the altar and the area around it and the offering with water so that he can make in everyone's mind, the whole nation's mind, Ahab, all the prophets, that there is no natural cause why there's going to be fire raining down this thing, because it is absolutely drenched and soaked in water. So what happens? He prays, and sure enough, in spite of any natural explanation, fire comes down and consumes the sacrifice. And the prophets of Baal are terrified. The nation of Israel says, well, this is the truth. Yahweh is the truth. The God of Elijah is the truth. And what does Elijah do? He rounds up the prophets and they slaughter them at Mount Carmel. Well, then, what's he think? And then it says, hey, guess what? Here comes the rain. And you think, well, surely the nation of Israel, surely Ahab, surely Jezebel will repent and believe. And so Elijah makes the way to Jezreel, where Jezebel is, and he thinks this is going to be his greatest triumph of all time, and that he has vindicated Yahweh. And that's where the chapter ends, and we'll come back to it next time. Well, let's go over to Luke real quick. Luke 22, what happens there? Jesus is arrested. Jesus is betrayed by Judas Iscariot, and Jesus says the dark hour has come. He knows exactly what's happening. Well, Peter, he's already predicted Peter would deny him 3 times. And you know what? Guess what? He does exactly that. You see it in the text 3 times. Peter, it says, when he realizes that Jesus had predicted it correctly and that he was going to betray him 3 times, and he actually did it, he wept bitterly. And I think that's where we ought to be. As the Baal prophets were terrified, they knew their judgment was sure, and they'd worshiped the wrong God. Peter sees he's worshiped the wrong God. He understands he has worshipped his own security, so to speak, and that his lying and his misrepresenting himself can get him out of things. And then when he realizes, well, Yahweh was right, or Jesus was right, then he realizes, oh, I've set myself up against the Lord Almighty, who has come on and taken flesh. I've seen it over and over, and I don't know why I forgot, but I did. This is the same Jesus who fed 5,000. He fed 4,000. He's raised people from the dead. He's raised Lazarus from the dead. He's raised the widow's son. He's raised people from the dead. He is Elijah, but even better. He is, as he said, gone to Jerusalem to die and give his life as a ransom for many. He has come that they might have life and have it abundantly. This is Jesus, and he has denied him. And he stands a debtor to mercy alone. And that's where we all stand. We stand as a debtor to mercy alone. Whether we are Elijah making the stand, we have triumphed, or whether we are Peter and are defeated, we stand only on the merits of a son, the Son of God, who has stood before the Sanhedrin and the council and said, as you say, I am the Son of God, come what may. And he lays down his life. No one takes it from him, but he lays it down freely of his own accord to save his flock, to save his people. And so if this is something that you are investigating, if this Jesus is something you're investigating, I call on you to wholeheartedly leave the other gods behind. If this is something this Jesus is someone you've known, I pray that this is encouraging to you to hear this story of how all the other gods that we might trust in are bankrupt and false, but the true God sent Christ, just as he sent the fire down for the consumption of that sacrifice to vindicate himself. He vindicates himself in his union with sinners like us because of the sacrifice of his own Son, that he can be just and the justifier of the ungodly. This is what the gospel in Romans is telling us. If you look at Romans 3, the greatest chapter in the Bible, 3:21 through 26, go read it. God is just and the justifier of the sinner through Christ, who is the true Elijah and the true Lamb of God, who is consumed for the sins of his people. Now, with that said, I invite you to follow this Jesus, to turn away from idols. We're all susceptible to turning away from God and turning to idols, and we need to put that to death today. Put it to death. Keep on fighting that sin, that flesh within you, and follow Christ forevermore. With that said, we'll come back to you on day 125. I hope this has been helpful for you as either a review or a preview. The reading plan is listed below in the description. If you're watching the video, go ahead and like it. Leave a comment, please. I'd love to interact with you. And subscribe. All right, we thank you, sir. Y'all take it easy. We'll see you next time. God bless. Online Bible Reading Club.